G'day everyone, welcome back to Frontlines and Faultlines with Mike Kelly. We're going to continue our conversations that we began with Michael Scott in the last session. He gave us a fantastic baseline and perspective of the situation that he was in the Middle East and some of those dynamics to tease that out for you. Obviously, as a military officer with a lot of operational experience and all that training that you get in terms of how operations are to be conducted, planned, executed, etc., and the appreciation process that we get drilled in, which I think is probably the best skill the Army gives us, because it tends to force you to approach a problem objectively and eliminate subjective bias, etc., and get to something that drops out the bottom of the funnel that's going to be effective, particularly when you've got lives at stake and the responsibilities you described as an officer in particular. So this brings me then to, you referred to the operations that have played out and what we've been seeing in a dizzying array through the course of the operations against Hezbollah and against Iran. And we're seeing some of that mirrored in Ukraine as well. It sort of begs the question, perhaps there might have been some cooperation there in how these things are developed and planned, because they don't happen overnight. So maybe sharing of notes, there might have been some of that. But and you mentioned RAD1. So firstly, we might tease out for the audience what RAD1 is, and then move into that sort of analysis and observations about the precise kind of military tactics and strategy that we've been seeing playing out.
Yeah, you bet. Michael Scott, CEO and founder of the 23 Foundation, harm minimisation charity to combat anti-Semitism. That is my career, leveraging some of the experiences that I had in my first career, where I rose to the rank of colonel in the Australian Army, including an amazing 27 months living in Jerusalem and responsible for a unarmed UN peacekeeping mission, including in southern Lebanon. And so one of the things that I've seen since after I stepped out of the military was that the RAD1 forces, that is the shock troops that Hezbollah were massing.
So what does RAD1 stand for?
RAD1 forces is the unit name. It's the shock forces that were due to go on a suicide mission into northern Israel to kill and capture, to take hostages back.
Specifically Hezbollah.
Hezbollah. The dynamic of in Lebanon, and geez, what a beautiful part of the world. It should be the Paris of the Middle East.
Once was.
But unfortunately, it once was. Lebanon is an amazing country. Phoenicia, for those history buffs, Phoenicia and the Lebanese siders that gave way to amazing triremes. It was the Phoenicians that actually established the great trading nation of Carthage, which was the bane of ancient Rome at the time. So these are ancient people, amazing part of the world that unfortunately has been taken over by violent Islamic militant fundamentalists.
Interesting footnote there is the cedars from Tyre were used to build Solomon's temple.
That's right. Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah,
the irony.
And so they used to, they chopped down Lebanese cedars. They floated them down the Eastern Mediterranean, and they carved them up into Jerusalem to build the second temple. Absolutely.
So thanks, Lebanon. You got the first temple.
And so in the last couple of thousand years, Lebanon has and Syria, for that matter, have rapidly changed in demographics. They were Christian nations. Unfortunately, Hezbollah is still even now the biggest gorilla in the room, where a search of the internet would rightly, I think, identified that the operational capacity has been significantly attrited based on the IDF operations at the end of 2024, and indeed they're ongoing this week. But my reading in the open source is that sadly Hezbollah retains a level of strength where they could decapitate at the moment any leaders from the Christian, the Druze, or the Sunni communities that are trying to throw off the yoke that is Hezbollah. In my judgment, what that all means is that things will worsen before they improve in Lebanon. But what improvement looks like is denying them succulent support, where we saw billions of dollars quite literally flowing from Iran into Lebanon, which has established Hezbollah as the gorilla in the room in this otherwise beautiful city. But the discussions that are going on at the geostrategic level behind closed doors are such that it's not beyond the realms of possibility now that Lebanon could join the Abraham Accords, the US initiative under the 47th president. And I must admit, Mike, 12 months ago, if someone was to say that was even a possibility next year, I wouldn't have believed it. We're living in a period of historical significance where it's difficult to foresee opportunities or vulnerabilities too far into the future.
Yeah, it seems that a window of opportunity has been opened up by the sacrifices and blood and treasure of Israel that you could present a reshaping of the Middle East into a better space if we, mounted an international full court press to get it there. But, that's the sort of intent we need to see from here. And, there's some of it out there, but not, I think, at the intensity that we need to see it at.
I think one of my other observations from having served with partner forces in Iraq and a couple of tours of Afghanistan is that you look at the level of intent of a couple of nations that are aligned to the US, that is Israel and also Ukraine. What would we have given to have partner forces in Iraq and Afghanistan that fought for their tomorrow with the level of ferocity of the Israeli Defense Force, citizen soldiers, volunteers, or the brave Ukrainian men and women on the east of Europe? One of two things could happen in Lebanon, I think. There could be a coming together to throw off the shackle of Hezbollah. My judgment, that's low probability at the moment because there's still, in my open source understanding, a lot of material and cash that Hezbollah can use to prop up its regime. But with the actions that we saw in Operation Rising Lion to not only neutralize Iranian threat, nuclear program, and the ballistic missile program, but also a severing of the Shia crescent, that is the supply line from Iran through Iraq, through Syria into Lebanon, that gives hope a chance, I think.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. We talk about these days JADC2 as a shorthand for Joint All-Domain Command and Control, and we talk about 5 domains now. But it seems to me we've kind of like added these really subcategories of domain these days with what Israel and the Ukrainians have shown us. But interestingly too, in that space, we've got, there's traditional issues around urban warfare, and we've seen that play out large in Gaza. And part of that being the Gaza Metro, the near 500 kilometres of underground sophisticated military infrastructure that cost $1 billion from Qatar to build. But a lot of people don't appreciate that Hezbollah had an even more elaborate system in Lebanon, where a North Korean construction company came in and taught them all their more sophisticated underground construction techniques, and then that was handed off to a Hezbollah company, the Jihad construction company, to build out. You could have actual mobile launchers could drive in and out of some of these tunnels to shoot and scoot and all that. So, but this is adding like this subterranean dimension to the landscape. What's your view? How do you see what we need to study more deeply and take out of that, for example? Is there much point for Australia to be understanding of those issues, or is it just something that's going to be a dynamic for the Middle East to worry about?
No, look, I think there's wide application. You talk to the five operational domains: air, sea, space, land, and cyber. I wrote an article a month or so ago talking to the sixth operational domain. About 15 years ago, I served in a chief of army's think tank. It's an organisation known by the first director, an amazing officer that you and I both know, Peter Lay, the Directorate of Army Research and Analysis, and something that I challenged some of my smart PhDs at the time was: competition is playing out in the five operational domains. What may be the sixth? And these amazing people that wore socks and sandals and pocket protectors, they sort of went away for a couple of days and came back, and they said, "Sir, in our judgment, it's the hacking of the human mind." Right. And we talked through whether that could be by chemicals or other means. But I think one of the things we've seen in Western nations is that our ideological enemies have been incredibly industrious while our gaze was elsewhere. While you were serving your nation as a parliamentarian, and while I had head down, backside up as a professional in the profession of arms, I didn't expect the level of misinformation to the extent that in the wars in the Middle East, Israel is waging an existential war. So many otherwise reasonable and open-minded people would land on the wrong side of a pretty basic binary right, wrong, light, darkness consideration. And so I think that's one of the big things that's playing out at the moment at the strategic and the national resilience level. But if we were to flip back into some of the tactics and operations, the fusion between human-machine teaming, where drones are being used not only for strikes but shielding, whether it be in urban terrain, surface level, above for retrans or enhanced optics, but even inside of tunnels, the teaming of dogs, for example, there's a number of lessons that need to be applied in the Australian construct. There are, I think, some of the key takeaways that I look at prima facie as an interested party, but not someone that's involved anymore with the Australian Defence Force.
Right. Well, one of the issues, we've seen there has been this conversation about how an urban war should be conducted. It's more about the moral dimension of that. And a lot of claims and counterclaims flying around about laws of armed conflict and all these sort of things. But you have been there and been briefed on the sort of precautions in attack that have been deployed in Gaza in particular. So can you explain to us all of the precautions that were being taken in Gaza?
Yeah, look, absolutely. The roll up, and I'm talking to the Jewish mothers and fathers across the Western world and Israel, be incredibly proud of the current generation of young Israelis and diaspora Jews that are operating so effectively in what, in my judgment, is the most complex operational environment world history has as yet known. Be very comfortable in their ethics and their morality. In my judgment, the Israeli Defence Forces of 2025 are the most highly educated, lawful, ethical and moral military fighting force world history has ever known, operating in a diabolical circumstance. And as I was driving from Sydney to Canberra today, I listened to a recent Dan Senor podcast, and one of his guests was talking to the fact that approximately 10 IDF soldiers were losing their life every month. That's in part to try and minimise civilian casualties. All of the rules of engagement, the orders for opening fire, proportionality that you as a former military lawyer, but also as a father and as a humanist, applied in different operational contexts. And I did when I was a combat team commander in southern Afghanistan in 2011. Israel is as good as, or in my judgment, even more robust there. The way that they are using technology, using networks and resources that we never saw in Iraq and Afghanistan, to the extent that they've mapped human terrain of 2.2 million people in urban environments, where they use leaflets, they use loud hailers, They gazette a particular location. They identify maneuver corridors. They even use soft knocks that there's Hamas infrastructure in this building that contains civilians. Move away by this time because the building is coming down. That will be studied for decades.
Right. So text messages, and then
it's extraordinary.
Drop a dumb ordnance, a non-explosive.
That's
that knocks on the roof,
knock, a soft knock, and the ability of the IDF, and this is in the open source. There's nothing I'm talking about classified, because I've been away from those systems for years. The ability for the IDF to prosecute a target in the rear of a vehicle that's moving. So as not to injure the person in the front and the driver's seat. It's simply extraordinary. We never saw that in Iraq and Afghanistan. The ability, the lengths the IDF goes to lose the tactical element of surprise, which is fundamental in our game, is to minimise human casualties, and to look at the gaslighting and the projection where you've got dimwits like that UK individual that gave a modern blood libel that 14,000 babies would lose their lives, but for in
blah 48 blah, hours or something.
Absolutely despicable. And when I read that's a modern blood libel. And then I think it was a couple of days later, a beautiful couple in Washington D.C. Were murdered by a domestic terrorist in the US that appears to have been motivated by ideology. It's something else that I find deeply confronting in the West, is that 2 weeks after a firebombing attack in a run to remember in Boulder, Colorado, 2 weeks before I was at a similar event 45 minutes south in Denver, Colorado, working with Jewish Americans, bringing attention to the fact that there's still hostages in Gaza.
Right.
And one of the reasons that I wear the hostage pin is that, having lived in Israel for 27 months, deep personal connection to people that were personally involved in the atrocity on October 7, and even now 21 months after that attack, a dear friend of mine that lives in the Hula Valley, which is in northern Israel, his adopted son remains a hostage in Gaza. Omer Nutra, a 22-year-old lone soldier, a US citizen that was serving in the Tank Corps near Berry on that horrible morning. It was only mid-December 2024 that the family had confirmation that Omer was murdered on October 7, and his body was taken by the terrorists into Gaza. The family had held out hope of life all that time. It's a level of trauma that I don't think many in the West can countenance. And indeed, part of the mission that I'm involved in now as a CEO of a nascent global charity is to help people in the comfortable West to empathize and relate with Israel and Israelis. It's a democracy. It's a frontline democracy. It's far more like Australia and the US and the UK than many people understand. I don't think, though, that those people that had their only experience with Israel from the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, the BBC in the UK, or some of the failing legacy media in America can actually experience that.
Yeah, and I don't think people really fully appreciate the level of cooperation that Australia has benefited from with Israel, including the intelligence that prevented the death of 400 passengers in an aircraft bomb that would have been deployed if not for Israeli intelligence, and the force protection assistance we've had in relation to the UAVs we deployed in Afghanistan with the Herons that were helping us with IED detection. At that time, actually, helmets and combat bandages, and the protected mobility vehicle technology we've been getting for the Hawkeye from Plassen, keeping people alive. Then there's the other force protections active systems such as Trophy and Spike and Typhoon, that on our ships and our vehicles. It's all one-way traffic basically, because that's where the operational experience is coming from. And we need to appreciate that that's been gladly and willingly given because of the history of our relationship. And we'll be teasing that out a bit more. But coming then to this new endeavour that you're engaged in, with this motivation that you have. So can you explain how you've gone about that and what your vision and plan is for the progressive evolution of this and how people can help?
Yeah, certainly. I think the starting reality is that I've cried more since October 7, 2023 than I have in the rest of my adult life, hearing about the trauma that was inflicted upon a beautiful society in the Middle East was deeply traumatizing. No Jewish blood in my family to my knowledge, but I consider myself as someone that has a Jewish mum and dad. They were my landlords in Jerusalem for 27 months. I formed connections of friendship with many Israelis that is as close as a kinship relationship. And so when I saw not only the violence of October 7, but how people were engaged in the worst case of victim blaming in the history of mankind, I thought, I've got to do something about this. And a Mark Twain quote that resonates with me is that the two most important days in a person's life are the day you're born and the day you understand why. And after October 9, 2023, that nonsense we saw at the Opera House, I had my why. The first couple of attempts to practically move the needle were failures. I would see on social media someone I went to school with, Brisbane Grammar School, 30 years ago, banging on about from the river to the sea.
Yes.
Hey mate, I've lived over there for a couple of years. That's not what's going on. Can we have a chat about it? Just get shouted at and cancelled. And so after that direct approach failed, I sort of sucked back into my turtle shell for a bit. And I thought through what I could do based on my planning and my experience and my unique value proposition. And I started thinking and planning. I read a lot, sort of 3 books a week on average then. I came across the example of, in a Cyrus biography, President Harry S. Truman, of the work of Senator J. William Fulbright, that in the 1940s established the Fulbright Act and the Fulbright Scholarship. And fast forward 80 years to today, it's bringing 8,000 people per annum from all over the world into US tertiary institutions, not only to educate, but to build cross-cultural linkages, soft power. It's a bit like the Colombo plan that Australia did at the end of the Second World War. And I thought that's actually a model that I can use to tackle the world's oldest hatred, anti-Semitism, in its virulent modern manifestation of anti-Zionism. I think the next book I read was from Benjamin Franklin, and a quote that resonated was, "Tell me I forget, teach me I may remember, but involve me I learn." And so in my judgment, I have limited success in explaining to reasonable open-minded people in a cafe in Sydney and Melbourne what Israel is like. I've got to get people across to interact with the environment. And so that was the genesis of what is now the 2023 Foundation, a nascent global charity to combat anti-Semitism. The mission being to combat anti-Semitism through lived personal experience, the vision being tomorrow's non-Jewish upstanders, not bystanders. And I'm setting myself a nice easy goal of the next generations of Douglas Murrays, Richard Kemps, Erin Molan's, Gemma Tognini's, Nova Peris, through experiential learning opportunities, whether it be thematic visits or placements into universities or support in vocational sector, high-tech sector, etc., etc.
Right. Yeah, and it's an amazing ambition you've set yourself there, and so the fundamental element of this is to get that people-to-people engagement. Make up your own mind then, your own judgment. See things on the ground and engage with people. And one of the things that mystifies me so much is it seems to be what we tend to call the progressive side of society. It's kind of like the issue seems to be on the left at the moment, and that's not by accident. Of course, the information warfare that's been going on has been targeting that part of society. Obviously, they see Labor government's in power here, and you've got the ability to kind of mobilise demonstrators and university students, etc. But in trying to somehow portray Israel as a colonialist power, and that it's a fascist power, it's a white supremacist power. Some of the most bizarre labelling going on, and for someone who is from the left, and my life was greatly affected and shaped by having lived and worked on a kibbutz in northern Israel, in Harod Me'ohad, and a country that was built by people of that bent, and the Histadrut, the General Federation of Labour, and the first target for Hamas when it took over the Gaza Strip was to overrun and overtake the Palestinian General Federation of Labour's building, throw them all out there, kill some of them, and turn it into a military headquarters. But these kibbutzim, the ones that suffered the most on October the 7th were, this was the socialist fraternity,
peaceniks,
who were leading the charge in the peace movement, who were looking after Gazans, helping ferry them to get medical support before the war. This is, and also giving them jobs on the kibbutz, trying to build those people-to-people connections, and who suffered and were slaughtered and raped and mutilated, in their reward for that. So the other side of this is, that there are groups in our society like the LGBTQIA community that I've fought very hard for in Parliament in terms of the marriage equality issue. And I watched some of my colleagues in the Labor Party in 2012 sit on the other side of the chamber to me. And they think that, the cause here to get behind is Hamas and Hezbollah, not realising the reality of that situation. I mean, can you explain why anyone who's of that sort of, who are of that type, why would they be lining up with Hamas and Hezbollah? How do Hamas and Hezbollah deal with people of that kind?
Yeah, I think the simple answer is that otherwise decent folk across the whole of the civilized West are being monumentally misled. And that's the really heartbreaking modern history of Israel, where as soon as they started winning, that is from 1967, where friends of mine in their 80s now were talking about the sheer terror of when Nasser closed the Straits of Tehran and was in the business of blockading, and the rhetoric was, we are going to push you, that is Israel, into the sea, and then we're going to step on your heads until you drown. That level of terror of a society that had only 20 years earlier been through the Holocaust, where a third of world Jewry was murdered by the Nazis, faced an extermination, and people were digging graves in the back of their yards, fearing the worst. The crazy reality that we find ourselves in now is that when Israel started winning, people began to turn on them. It makes absolutely no sense, and it's really traumatizing to many of my dear Jewish friends in Australia and elsewhere that they have strived so hard for so long to help every other minority community, whether it be Indigenous communities or gay and lesbian, every other community that was being victimized by society, that in their time in need they were turned on. It's a level of betrayal, I think, that sociologists would need to pay attention to, so that we as a people can learn to do better in the future. But as you've said, and there was a recent study by Pew Research in June 2025 that I use to map some of my data-driven decision-making, that those that identify in Australia as of the ideological left, 9 in 10 are hostile to Israel and the current government. I'm actually working with different members in the community, including the gay and lesbian community, because I've got dear friends in Australia of that community, dear friends in America as well as Israel. I think one of the best ways that I can make a meaningful difference is to run a thematic visit concurrent with Pride March in Tel Aviv in June
which is
next
one
year.
of the biggest in the world.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't exist anywhere else in North Africa or the Middle East.
That's right. I think otherwise reasonable and open-minded Australians have been fundamentally misled to the extent that when you and I hear Tel Aviv, it's a proper noun. It has meaning to us because we've been there. But I think otherwise reasonable people that might not have had any first-hand experience with Israel, they may flash a mental model of Mogadishu, Somalia or Soweto. They can't empathise and relate what it would feel like being in a suburb just like Sydney or Melbourne, and being under rocket attack where there could be an incursion from terrorists from the West Bank, Judea and Samaria that would look at murdering them as they're going to get nappies at a grocery store.
Yes.
And so experiential learning opportunities, I think, is the answer to help people empathise and relate.
I think so.
Education is the key. But it's not something that, in my view, we can do as a full court press over social media. I'm looking at embracing a social movement, the ripple effect.
Right.
From drops come ripples, from ripples waves, selecting a couple of the right people and giving them an experience and nurturing them through to be tomorrow's non-Jewish upstanders.
No, it's a great objective. And, if you were a gay person in Gaza, you would have been immediately executed. Hezbollah would do the same thing to you. They do it in Iran. We've talked about that just recently. And in Australia, this Jewish community, the very first marriage that occurred once we got that legislation finally through was at Emmanuel Synagogue in Sydney. Prominent float they always have in the gay Mardi Gras, but also the absolute commitment and forefront leadership the Jewish community showed in fighting those indigenous causes of land rights, all pro bono legal support that they received, which Nova Peris talks a lot about.
Exactly.
So, but thank you very much, mate, for what you're doing in that respect, and hopefully people will be able to donate to that cause of helping work with this foundation. And, whatever we can do to help, we'll stay in touch and we'll pass on information when we can of any call for assistance you want to make to advance that cause of dialogue and peace through people connecting. So thanks very much, mate. That was just an amazing experience we've had talking with someone with so much skin in the game and so much real life experience. So I hope that was informative for you and then it motivated you to find out more and to find out how to get involved with the 2023 Foundation and assist its path to success in building people-to-people contact. So that's all we have time for in this session. Look forward to having you again the next time around. But we'll leave it there. Thank you, Mike, for being here, and we'll see you again next time.